G'day everyone, Lauren Kress, the business scientist here. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to my second video on personality types. Today we're going to jump straight into cognitive functions. These are kind of like the basic building blocks that make up personality types, and there are 8 of them. Now, I'm a visual person, so I like to do things visually. So let's jump back. If you haven't seen my first video and you're not very familiar with the 16 personalities, we kind of walk through this in a bit of detail, which is kind of the prerequisite to understand this. So jump over to that video if you aren't familiar with this. If you're all good with this, then let's go straight into these cognitive functions. So essentially, cognitive functions are looking at our preference when it comes to observation, when it comes to decision making, whether we tend to use extroverted or introverted functions, and also what stack we prefer to do things in. So there's something called a cognitive stack. It's basically like, what are our go-to cognitive functions? What do we prefer to use in situations, especially things like high stake situations, things that are kind of like our automatic when we're tired. These are the things we're going to tend to go to. It's important to keep in mind we all can do everything. So we all will be able to do extroverted and introverted sensing and intuition. And we also are all able to do both sensing and intuition. This is just more about our preference. So let's talk about these in a little bit more detail. So these little E's here, they represent extroverted, and these little I's here, they represent introverted. So if you remember, these are our observation functions, and these two are our decision-making functions. So let's have a look at how we sort of put all of this together. How do you know what goes with what? Well, the easiest way to think about it is kind of like opposites go together. So if you have extroverted intuition, you're going to have introverted sensing. If you have extroverted sensing, you're going to have introverted intuition. They always go together. You're not going to have NISI and NESE. You're also not going to have NISESI. So let's just put these into the way they like to be paired. It's like a little chemical bond between them, for those of you that like science. Okay. Same goes for the feeling and thinking functions. So we have extroverted feeling and we have introverted feeling. We have extroverted thinking and we have introverted thinking. Now, extroverted thinking is going to be paired with introverted feeling, and these two will be paired together also. Now, what does this mean in terms of how we actually do things? What's the difference between extroverted and introverted sensing, for instance? Well, it's a big part to do with, and if you watch the first video, you'd already know that when we're talking about extroverted and introverted, it's not just about like whether we like hanging out with people or not. It's more about the way that we approach the world, our worldview, how our mind works in terms of these different functions. So for instance, with an introvert, an introverted function is going to be more narrow, personal, and deep. We went through this in the other video. An extroverted function is going to be more broad, external, and kind of skimming the surface a little bit more. So someone who has an E, for example, extroverted intuition, is going to be thinking about these abstract patterns, meanings, and why outwardly focused. They're going to be looking around at the world and trying to find connections between things that are happening in the world. Someone who has an introverted intuition function, that's going to be more narrow and personal. So they're still looking for the abstract patterns and meanings, but they're more looking at how does this all connect for my life? What does this mean for me? What does my future look like? What have I done in my past? And how does that relate? What does that tell me about my future? I need to figure these patterns out for myself. And it's going to go a lot deeper. Okay. Then we have extroverted sensing versus introverted sensing. So same thing. What is it when we're talking about sensing? We're talking about the concrete, the factual, and the present. We're talking about what's happening right now. So extroverted sensing, that's looking around at the world going, what's happening out there in the world right now? What is concretely there? I kind of think of this as like the people who really like to read newspapers, like the news of the day. That's extroverted sensing. You're kind of going, what's actually real out there? Where someone who had extroverted intuition would more be going, what are the connections between the things that are happening in the world? How does that relate to events of the past? How do these frameworks predict the way news stories are going to be told over and over again? And then we have introverted sensing. So introverted sensing, again, concrete, factual, what's going on, but it's going to be more narrow, personal, and it's going to be deeper as well. So with introverted sensing, it's more like I've got to organize my bookshelf. I've got to get everything organized in my house for me. I need to figure out this stuff in my head and make sure all the facts line up. I've got my story straight in my head. Then we have extroverted feeling and introverted feeling. So we've done the observation ones. Actually, let's even just put a little label here. These are like observation cognitive functions. And these are our decision-making cognitive functions. So extroverted feeling, what's that going to look like? Well, let's go back over here again, broad and external. So extroverted feelers tend to look at the world and go, okay, how is everyone out here feeling? What are people, how do people value this stuff? Is this valuable or not valuable? What does everyone feel about that? Do people generally like this or not like this? Should I like this? Because everyone else seems to like this. That's extroverted feeling. Introverted feeling, and obviously people have personal feelings who have extroverted feeling function, or maybe it's not obvious, so that's why I'm saying it. But introverted feelers tend to go even like a step. They make things even more personal. So it's more like, how do I feel about this? How do I value this? What's going on for me in my emotions right now? How am I feeling? That's introverted feeling. Then we have introverted thinking. Introverted thinking, again, narrow and personal. So, okay, logically and rationally, what makes sense? I need to go away and problem solve this and work this out in my head. I need to kind of sit there, nut through this and go, okay, right, I figured this out for myself. Like an introverted thinker would be probably really enjoying doing something like a puzzle on their own. But if they were told to like follow a simple way of doing a puzzle the best way possible based on how other people think, they would be getting asked to be more of an extroverted thinker. An extroverted thinker, again, what's going on out there in the world? What is logical and rational out there that I could just use to solve my problem? You know, so it's kind of quicker in a lot of ways, extroverted thinking, but it's also like you haven't completely figured it out for yourself. So then if you try to explain it to someone else, it might be a lot harder because you don't understand the inner workings of it as much. How do we know whether someone has extroverted intuition, extroverted sensing? What cognitive functions go into a personality? Well, the letters kind of tell you. You just have to know how to kind of decode it. So I'm going to give you some examples so you can understand it more. So I've used these two examples. I've chosen these on purpose, ENFJ and INFJ, because the only thing that's different is the I. So it'll give you a really good understanding of what the difference is. An extrovert is a bit easier to do because you simply look at the first letter and the last letter, and this kind of tells you what is going to be right at the top of their preferences when it comes to the cognitive functions. So there's 4 letters, you have 4 cognitive functions that you use, but they go in a particular order depending on your personality type. So let's just take these off so we can use this. So here we have J. J is about a preference for decision making. We went through this the other day. With judging, judging is about decisions being outwardly focused and observations are less is more. So your J is telling you that this F right here is going to be extroverted. So you look at E, J, and then you go, okay, this means I need to look at the F. That's going to be the first extroverted function. And because this person's an extrovert, the extroverted function goes right at the top. Now, the function at the top is what we call a dominant function. So a dominant function is the function that is our absolute preference, the way that it's sort of like the thing that's like our default mode, the easiest one to do. We're really happy to use this one. We feel very comfortable. It's kind of like if you think about it in terms of like your strengths, this would be like the top strength of an ENFJ. They're really good at looking outside and going, how does everyone else feel? What's going on? Now, obviously, people can also develop that skill. We're just talking about a tendency for preference of going, this is my way to navigate the world. How's everyone feeling right now? And I'm going to be sort of prioritizing that without even thinking about it. It's just sort of that's what's happening. So very happy to use our dominant function. Now, let's go over to INFJ. INFJ is a little bit different. We're still going to look at the first and last letter because the first letter is telling us that this person is introverted. But the last letter is always going to be telling us what the first extroverted function is, right? But we know that, well, the first extroverted function isn't going to be the dominant function because this person is introverted. So they still have FE, but FE isn't their preference. Let's just put FE down here for the minute. FE is what we call the helper function or the secondary function. We're also pretty comfortable using this one. And it's why a lot of people say, oh, I'm on the cusp of extroverted and introverted, because we do use a helper function that is the opposite of our extroverted or our introverted function. So in this case, their helper function is FE. This J gives us that clue. Their dominant function is going to be told to you by this little baby here, the N, which is NI, introverted intuition. Then we go introverted intuition, got that here. Now, let's put a little smiley face for how someone feels about using their their sort of helper function. So what about the extrovert? Well, you probably already guessed. Now we're going to be looking at this other letter here, and that's going to tell us what the helper function is. Whatever is at the top, we've got to make the second one introverted. So our helper function in an ENFJ is NI. So you can see in the way that an ENFJ and an INFJ are observing the world and making decisions, it's actually their preferences are the same. It's just that an INFJ will be doing a bit more of the introverted intuition preference, which an ENFJ can totally understand, and vice versa. An ENFJ will be doing extroverted feeling, which the INFJ also uses to make decisions. But there are other functions in this stack. So these two are the ones we're most comfortable with. There are also tertiary functions, which we're probably not as happy to use. We can use it and it can be really helpful. But for the tertiary function, we're probably feeling a bit more like this. We're kind of like, all right, as we get older, as we develop more, this is the one we have the most sort of like room for improvement, but it feels like accessible to improve this one. Let's bring these down a little bit. So as we're going to make our axis soon, which I'll tell you about. So tertiary function is going to be the opposite of the helper function. So remember, we were doing this magnet thing before. What's the opposite of introverted intuition? It's going to be extroverted sensing. So we put this down here. It took me a while to get this the first time, and then it sort of became quite easy after that. So just have a go at doing a few like this, and then you'll start to see how it works. And then we can start applying it to real life situations, which is the fun part. All right. On the other hand, INFJs, their helper function isn't going to be SE because this is a decision-making function. So it's going to be FE, TI, a tertiary function. And then we have finally the function that we kind of suppress. And this one is the one that I don't know, to me, it's like the one that you kind of have to do a lot of more work on to really use it. It's in your stack, but you're kind of not too happy about using it. So let's have a look. It's the one that you go, oh, okay, I've got to do some of this stuff. So let's just make a little bit of room here. It's going to be the opposite of the dominant function. So the opposite of FE is going to be TI. We saw it here before, right? So TI is going to be sort of like, this is called the inferior function. Now, for an introvert, it's going to be different. I'll let you think about it while I find a smiley face that represents how we feel about our inferior function. These are getting a bit close together, aren't they? Let's spread this out a little bit more. All right. Oh, look at that. All right, let's spread these out a little bit more. Okay, so the inferior function is going to be, have you worked it out yet? It's going to be SE, extroverted sensing. And you might have already had the clue because we kind of saw it here before already. But just to make sure it's kind of making sense to you. So this is how we get our axis. And each personality has an axis. So we have these two are opposites. And these two are opposites. Now, I actually think this is particularly important for understanding motivations of personality types. It's going to help us to start grouping personality types together, because if you're kind of thinking, how am I going to do 16 different marketing messages? That's a lot of work. When it comes to things like persona development, we need to start thinking about cognitive functions and how they group together rather than thinking about each personality type. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about the families of personalities, and we're going to be talking about the temperaments of personalities. And that's going to start to really help you understand, okay, how do I inform different stakeholders? How do I get different people on board? How do I get different types of people to buy? By grouping these families together, because a lot of personalities share a lot of the same things. For instance, an ENFJ and an INFJ, there's a lot in common here in the top two. They're going to be looking for similar things when it comes to marketing and sales. So we don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel each time we look at a personality, but we can start to see the different ways that we can bundle things together. So that was a lot of information. The easiest way I found to get my head around it was just to practice. Look at your personality type and see if you can work out what your axis is. And feel free, if you like, drop it in the comments and you can check with me. Did I get this right? Is this the right cognitive stack for me? All right, that's it from me for today. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up below. Make sure you subscribe to my channel for more videos like this, and I'll see you next time. Cheers, guys.